On December 18, 1994, three French cave explorers followed a faint draft of air seeping through a gap in a cliff face in southern France and found themselves standing inside a chamber sealed off from the outside world for roughly 21,000 years, meaning as of today, that seal itself dates back close to 23,000 years. No animal, no flood, no gust of weather had touched the inside of that cave since a rockslide buried its original entrance during the last ice age. What those three explorers found waiting inside shouldn't have existed at all, not at that age, not in that condition, and not with the level of sophistication packed into every single chamber they explored. Start with how the discovery actually happened, because the moment itself came down to nothing more than a lucky draft of air on a winter afternoon. Jean-Marie Chauvet, Eliette Brunel, and Christian Hilaire were exploring the limestone cliffs near Vallon-Pont d'Arc in France's Ardèche region, an area already known for producing decorated caves, when a current of air escaping through a narrow opening caught their attention, a telltale sign experienced cave explorers know often means a hidden space lies somewhere beyond the rock. They widened the gap just enough to squeeze through and descended into a chamber that opened into several more, discovering scattered animal bones almost immediately, clear evidence the space had once been occupied by something long before they arrived. Pushing further into the darkness, their lights caught something nobody expected to find this well preserved: walls covered in paintings and engravings, rendered with a level of technical skill that seemed, at first glance, to belong to a far more recent period of human history than anyone could have anticipated. Archaeologist Jean Clottes, brought in almost immediately to authenticate the find, spent hours examining the paintings before emerging convinced he had just witnessed one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the entire 20th century, a judgment that later research would only end up confirming further rather than walking back. The reason the cave had survived in that condition came down to simple, brutal geology rather than any deliberate human effort to protect it. Sometime after the last humans left, a massive rock slide collapsed across the cave's original entrance, sealing it completely and instantly. No light got in, no air exchanged with the outside world, no animal could wander through searching for shelter, and no rainwater could slowly erode what was left inside. The cave stayed locked in exactly the state its last visitors left it in for roughly 21,000 years before that December afternoon in 1994, meaning the seal itself, measured against today's calendar rather than the year of its discovery, stretches back nearly 23,000 years into the past. If you're finding this interesting, be sure to subscribe to understand more DNA from the past. What had been sealed inside turned out to be one of the largest and most complete collections of Ice Age art ever discovered anywhere on Earth. Spanning roughly 400 meters of interconnected chambers, the cave contains more than 420 individual animal images representing at least 13 separate species, some of which had never before shown up in cave art from this period at all. The most famous panel, found in the cave's deepest chamber, stretches 36 feet across and depicts 16 lions leaping toward a fleeing herd of bison, rendered with visible motion and depth that gives the impression of a hunt caught mid-action rather than a static image frozen in place. A separate panel shows two woolly rhinoceroses locking horns in an apparent territorial contest, captured with enough anatomical detail to read as a genuine behavioral moment rather than a simple outline sketched from memory, while the famous horse panel expands into a scene of 30 different animals interacting across the rock face, including what appears to be a tense confrontation between a group of horses and a pair of rhinos standing their ground against them. None of this matched what researchers expected cave art from this era to look like. Most Paleolithic cave paintings found elsewhere focus overwhelmingly on the animals early humans actually hunted for food: horses, bison, deer, and reindeer, animals that made up the bulk of their diet. At Chauvet, lions, mammoths, and rhinoceroses alone account for roughly 63% of every animal identified on the walls, dangerous, rarely hunted animals that show up seldom, if ever, in cave art from anywhere else in the world, alongside leopards and hyenas that appear almost nowhere else in the entire archaeological record of this period at all. That mismatch between what the art depicted and what the artists actually hunted, combined with the sheer technical polish of the work, initially made some researchers question whether the paintings could really be as old as they appeared to be. The skill on display looked, to some early skeptics examining the first photographs, too advanced and too deliberately composed for the period being claimed, prompting real, serious doubts within the archaeological community before anyone had a chance to properly date the material itself. Settling the question meant dating the art directly rather than relying on instinct about how sophisticated Ice Age humans were supposed to be capable of at that point in prehistory. A comprehensive study published in 2016, drawing on 88 separate radiocarbon dates gathered from charcoal, pigment, and bones scattered throughout the cave, confirmed something even more remarkable than the original 1990s estimate had suggested. Humans had used the cave during two entirely separate periods, thousands of years apart from each other, with a long gap of total abandonment sitting in between. The first occupation ran from roughly 37,000 to 33,500 years ago and produced the overwhelming majority of the cave's finest, most technically accomplished paintings. A second, much lighter occupation followed between roughly 31,000 and 28,000 years ago, leaving behind little more than scattered footprints, torch smoke stains on the ceiling, and the remains of small fires rather than any new significant artwork. Chauvet's earliest paintings turned out to be nearly twice as old as the art at Lascaux, France's other famous decorated cave, appending the long-standing assumption that artistic sophistication only developed gradually over tens of thousands of years, leading up to more recent, better-known sites. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The paintings weren't the only thing the rockslide had preserved inside that sealed chamber. The cave floor is scattered with roughly 2,500 cave bear bones and close to 170 cave bear skulls, along with more than 300 shallow depressions worn into the clay floor, where the bears, animals considerably larger than a modern grizzly, once hibernated season after season for countless generations before any human ever set foot inside. In one chamber, researchers found something stranger still: a cave bear skull deliberately positioned on a raised stone slab near the cave's center, resembling nothing so much as a makeshift altar, a detail that has fueled ongoing speculation for decades about what kind of significance the animal held for the humans who once shared this space with it, whether practical, symbolic, or something closer to genuine reverence. Elsewhere in the cave, a single trackway of footprints stretches roughly 230 feet across the soft clay floor, including the prints of a child estimated to be around 8 years old, walking alongside the paw prints of a large canid, either an early dog or a wolf that happened to cross the same stretch of ground. Researchers still can't say for certain whether those two sets of prints were made during the same walk through the darkness or separated by centuries of unrelated visits, but if they do belong to the same moment, they may represent some of the earliest physical evidence anywhere on Earth of a human and a canine moving through a space together, side by side. Chauvet has never been opened to the public, a deliberate decision made specifically to avoid repeating what happened at Lascaux, where decades of heavy tourist traffic introduced mold and algae that steadily damaged paintings originally preserved intact for over 15,000 years before visitors ever set foot inside. A steel security door now seals the modern entrance, and access is restricted almost entirely to researchers and conservation specialists working under carefully controlled conditions. Instead, a full-scale replica, built a short distance from the original site, opened to visitors in 2015, reproducing the cave's chambers and artwork in exhaustive, painstaking detail so the public could experience it without risking any damage to the real thing. The cave earned UNESCO World Heritage status on June 22, 2014, formally recognizing it as one of the most significant prehistoric sites ever found anywhere in the world. And in 2010, filmmaker Werner Herzog and a small crew became the first outsiders ever granted permission to film inside the actual cave, producing the documentary Cave of Forgotten Dreams to give the wider world its only real glimpse of what had been sitting behind that rock slide for so long. Line up everything sealed inside that cave, and the picture goes well beyond a simple time capsule frozen at a single moment in prehistory. A rock slide that collapsed sometime during the last ice age preserved artwork nearly twice as old as any comparable site on Earth, executed with a level of narrative skill and technical control nobody expected from humans that far back in time, sophisticated enough that early researchers briefly doubted it could be genuine at all. It preserved the remains of hundreds of cave bears, including one skull someone had deliberately placed exactly where they wanted it found, on a raised stone slab that still resembles an altar tens of thousands of years later. And it preserved a set of footprints belonging to a child and a large canid, walking together through total darkness at some point during the last ice age, evidence that still hasn't fully settled how far back the bond between humans and dogs actually reaches, or whether that particular pairing was even real. None of it should have survived intact for this long, exposed to open air and curious animals the way most prehistoric sites eventually are. A single rockfall, collapsing at exactly the right moment, made sure all of it did, sealing an entire chapter of Ice Age human life behind solid stone, until three explorers happened to notice a draft of air on an otherwise ordinary December afternoon.